Dad and Sarah, when you dropped me off at school today, I decided I really am going to California. Sarah, you said you didn't want me around. Look, you got it. I'm gone. That's why I saved my money. Dad, I took $300 from you. Alissa. Those were the haunting words of 17-year-old Alissa Turney, who vanished on the last day of her junior year. At least, that's what everyone believed, until 2008, when the investigation into the missing Phoenix teen was reopened, and someone close to home emerged as the prime suspect.
Abnormia.
Welcome to Murder You, an Abnormia original, a true crime series exploring the most shocking murders worldwide. I'm your host, Maddie. This week's episode is The Vanishing of Alissa Turney. Before we begin, please like and subscribe to our channel for all the latest Murder You content. Let's get started.
Phoenix, Arizona, the spring of 2001. School's almost out. Graduation is around the corner, and summer is calling. But for one high school junior, that final bell never rings. Her name is Alissa Turney. She was 17 years old and a junior at Paradise Valley High School.
She had shoulder-length brown hair, bright eyes, and a wide, infectious smile. Her friends describe her as funny, sarcastic, fiercely independent, and full of life. Alissa was born in Phoenix, Arizona on April 3, 1984, to Barbara Farner Strom and Stephen Strom. She had an older brother named John. Her parents divorced when she was only 3, and Barbara remarried an electrician and father of 3 named Michael Turney. The marriage created a blended family. Barbara had 2 children from her previous marriage, Alissa and her older brother John. Michael had 3 sons from a prior relationship, Rhett, James, and Michael Jr. The couple soon had a daughter whom they named Sarah. She adored and looked up to Alissa, but it wasn't all happy times. When Alissa was 9 and Sarah was 4, their mother died of lung cancer. Michael adopted Alissa and John after their mother's death. Alissa and Sarah were the youngest kids, and eventually, they were the only kids living with Michael as the others moved out when they reached adulthood. Alissa was known for standing up for herself, cracking jokes, and dreaming about her future. Like most teens, she fought with her parents, hated curfews, and craved freedom. However, Alissa also had clear goals. She was interested in welding and planned to attend college, and she often discussed her desire to become an architect. She even enrolled in vocational classes at a nearby campus that offered career-oriented education. She had a part-time job at Jack in the Box and a boyfriend named John Lackman, whom she was crazy about. They passed notes in class, talked on the phone late into the night, and made summer plans together. He said she never once mentioned wanting to leave town, much less without him. Alissa was brilliant, grounded, and known for defending the people she cared about. Her classmates all said she wasn't the type to disappear. She had too much going on and had overcome enough tragedy to be resilient. She was recognized for facing her problems, not running away from them. But on May 17, 2001, just hours after being picked up from school by her stepfather, Alissa vanished, and nothing about her disappearance made sense. Nothing seemed unusual on that summer day in the desert metropolis. Michael Turney showed up at school and signed Alissa out of school early. He told administrators they had plans. He later claimed he took her to lunch and brought her home, where they argued. According to Turney, Alissa was angry about wanting to stay out later that night with a friend. She hated that she had no independence and stormed off to her room. Again, that's Turney's story, which aligns nicely with the troubled teen runaway theory he was telling people. He said Alissa was gone when he returned from picking up Sarah later that afternoon.
Turney said he found a handwritten note by Alissa that said she was leaving home and heading to California because nobody wanted her around. She had supposedly taken $300 from her savings account and run away. Turney told everyone she was troubled and had acted out before. He said she was probably off with friends or strangers, living some rebellious teenage fantasy. But the story began to fall apart when her friends and family took a closer look.
For starters, Alissa had left behind her cell phone, purse, and makeup. Looking around the room, it seemed she had taken nothing at all. She hadn't packed for a trip and didn't take everyday items she would need or possessions she would miss. According to ABC News, there was $1,800 in her bank account that hadn't been touched. She left behind her beloved dog, Marley. Even more telling, she never contacted her boyfriend, her friends, or her younger sister Sarah, the person she was closest to in the world. Michael Turney had been in Alissa's life from an early age. He raised Alissa alongside his biological daughter Sarah and had been her legal guardian since she was 9. But Michael wasn't your average dad. He worked as an electrician but had previously served as a deputy sheriff in California. He presented himself as hyper-vigilant, protective, maybe even paranoid. And as Sarah later said, it felt like they were constantly being watched.
The Turney home was full of surveillance. There were cameras inside and outside. All phone calls were recorded. Michael logged everything. When Alissa made or received calls, he documented the time, the duration, and who it was with. He claimed it was for safety, but to outsiders, it felt controlling, overbearing, maybe even dangerous.
Turney contacted the police to report Alissa missing and emphasized the runaway angle. He claimed Alissa had behavioral problems, that she was getting into drugs, sneaking out, and becoming unmanageable. But none of that aligned with what her friends and teachers knew about her. Her grades were fine, she was reliable at work, she wasn't the partying type, and she had no history of violence, theft, or running away. The police accepted Turney's version of events and treated Alissa as a runaway rather than a potential murder victim. Michael was, after all, a former sheriff's deputy. Alissa's younger sister, Sarah, was also in the dark about that day. "I wasn't worried," Sarah told People in 2020. "I was under the impression she was going to be back. I don't think her being gone forever was anything that ever crossed my mind." However, as the years ticked by, Sarah often wondered where her sister was and what she was doing. She hoped Alissa was living her best life in California, but she would soon discover there was more to the case than she ever imagined. In 2006, 5 years after Alissa vanished, the case was suddenly back on detectives' radar because of a confession. A convicted killer named Thomas Heimer claimed he had murdered Alissa after meeting her in a hotel. But investigators didn't take long to realize the story didn't hold up. Heimer had a habit of confessing to crimes he didn't commit. Still, that false lead did something unexpected. It reopened Alissa's case. When detectives took a fresh look, they noticed things they hadn't seen before: the inconsistencies in Michael Turney's story, the surveillance footage that mysteriously vanished, and a runaway narrative that didn't make sense. What began as a bogus confession would ultimately change everything. Turney said he took Alissa to lunch, but there were no receipts, surveillance footage, or witnesses who remembered seeing them. He claimed the surveillance cameras had been turned off that day or malfunctioned. Really? That's rather convenient. Alissa's note was handwritten, but no handwriting expert ever confirmed it was hers. It seemed like the police bought his story, either because Turney was a former deputy or because they didn't take Alissa's disappearance seriously. The real twist came in 2008 when police executed a search warrant on Michael Turney's home. What they found shocked everyone. Inside the house were 26 homemade pipe bombs, assault rifles, a van filled with gasoline cans, maps, blueprints, and a manifesto accusing the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Michael's former union, of being involved in Alissa's disappearance. He claimed the union had kidnapped, abused, and killed his daughter. It appeared Turney was planning a full-scale domestic terrorist attack on the organization. It was delusional, dangerous, and terrifying. But why would Turney plan this attack if he was the one who killed Alissa? Well, the timing of the planned attack was interesting. Turney was no doubt aware they were looking at him as the prime suspect in Alissa's disappearance. It's possible Turney constructed a revenge-driven conspiracy theory that framed the electrical union as being behind his daughter's murder, as a diversion from the investigation into his own actions. Michael was arrested and sentenced to 10 years in federal prison on weapons charges. But despite the mountain of suspicion surrounding him, he was not charged with anything related to Alissa's case.
The story might have faded in the years that followed, but Sarah Turney wouldn't let that happen. She was just 12 when her sister disappeared, and for years she believed her father. She had to. He was the only parent she had left. But as she grew older and began to revisit what she remembered, things stopped making sense. Sarah started digging through her father's boxes of recordings, transcripts, police files, and evidence. She asked the hard questions the police weren't asking, and the answers she found would forever change her life.
Alissa hadn't acted out. She hadn't planned to run away. She had confided in friends that she was terrified of her father, that he was too controlling and possibly even abusive. One friend said Alissa told her that Michael had tried something inappropriate, though Alissa never filed a formal report. Alissa had reportedly told a school counselor that her home life felt controlling and unsafe. Sarah began advocating online. She launched a podcast called Voices for Justice and a social media campaign that went viral. She posted videos on TikTok and shared personal stories on Instagram, bringing renewed attention to her sister's case. She contacted reporters, lawmakers, nonprofit organizations, and true crime creators. She pleaded with law enforcement to take another look. Gradually, momentum began to build. In August 2020, nearly 2 decades after Alissa's disappearance, Michael Turney was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The indictment shocked many people. Although there was no body, no physical evidence, and no DNA, prosecutors believed they had enough circumstantial evidence to make their case. They argued that Michael Turney killed Alissa on the day she disappeared. He had lured her home under the pretense of lunch, confronted her about something, possibly the abuse, and silenced her permanently. They believed he staged the note to make it appear like she had run away. However, the case encountered challenges from the outset. The most significant setback arose during pre-trial hearings when the judge ruled that many of Alissa's remarks to her friends about Michael's predatory behavior were inadmissible as hearsay. This testimony constituted the foundation of the prosecution's argument. Without it, the case fell apart. On July 17, 2023, after the prosecution rested its case, the defense filed a motion for acquittal. The judge granted this motion, stating there was insufficient evidence to support a conviction. As a result, all charges were dismissed, and Turney walked free the following day. For Sarah, it was devastating, but not the end. She has continued to push for justice, not just for Alissa, but also for other victims and families. Her podcast now highlights other cold cases. She's worked with lawmakers to propose legislation that protects victims' rights in cold cases and expands access to investigative resources. She's also been outspoken about her own trauma, about growing up in a home where she was manipulated and isolated, about the grief of losing a sister, about the horror of realizing your parent might be a killer. And she hasn't stopped, not even for a moment. Today, Sarah Turney is one of the most prominent victim advocates on social media. Her TikToks reach millions. Her story has been featured on 2020, Dateline, and multiple podcasts. And she still believes the case isn't over, that one day the truth will surface.
Alissa Turney was 17 years old when she disappeared. She loved music, made people laugh, and dreamed of living in California someday. She had a big heart and a brilliant mind. She was brave, bold, and ready to embrace adulthood. She deserved to live that life. Instead, her story turned into a cautionary tale about secrecy, silence, and the consequences of ignoring red flags. We may never discover what happened to Alissa, but we must always remember her life mattered. She was cherished by many, and she is still deeply missed.
That's it for this episode. And please remember, if you or someone you know needs help, advocates at the National Domestic Violence Hotline are available to talk confidentially with anyone in the United States who is experiencing domestic violence, seeking resources or information, or questioning unhealthy aspects of their relationship. Call 1-879-9-SAFE-7233. Be sure to like and subscribe to Murder You podcast, and don't forget to watch on our YouTube channel.
Abnormia.